the sales tax on their transactions. Well, this is a way of having them pay some of the cost of their own bailouts.
Right.
Well, Summers had written in favor of that kind of a tax back in the 1980s, but then in the 90s, when he was Treasury Secretary, he helped kill the Tobin tax proposal, named after a former, the late James Tobin, Nobel laureate economist and a Kennedy administration economist. And it was just a similar type of a tax proposal to tax foreign exchange transactions, like a tenth of a penny on the dollar. Summers helped kill that. It was at a time when the Tobin tax was getting endorsements from major European powers. He also pushed Stiglitz out of the World Bank. Joe Stiglitz had been the chief economist at the World Bank, and he had been critical of really this whole bailout model and how it was being applied to Southeast Asia.
Right.
And Larry Summers got him fired. So there's a lot of reasons that Larry Summers should be seeking penance himself.
First and foremost, the big black mark, as you mentioned, he pushed for the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act, which basically turned Wall Street into Las Vegas.
Yeah.
My big issue with him is that that in the world financial crisis of 1997 through 1999, he pushed Asia to open its doors to foreign banks in exchange for bailout loans.
Absolutely. And when Stiglitz was critical of that, that's when Summers got Stiglitz fired, basically.
All right. So, Lawrence Summers, let's talk about Tim Geithner.
Tim Geithner was I think an aide to Larry Summers at the Treasury Department. He moved up the Treasury Department bureaucracy. He then moved over to the International Monetary Fund, and he was one of the IMF point men on the Asian currency contagion, the bailout model that we were just discussing. And then he moved from there to president of the New York Federal Reserve Bank. And as president of the New York Fed, he has been right in the middle of the bailouts for J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, AIG, working with Hank Paulson on the whole troubled asset relief program. So this is Mr. Bailout in many ways, and he has talked about creating a clearinghouse for credit default swaps. I don't think he's in favor of an exchange for credit default swaps that would have the authority to impose capital requirements and margin requirements.
To regulate and also to do market surveillance.
Yeah.
My issue with Geithner also is the fact that he continues to be a strong advocate of financial deregulation. I haven't heard one word about regulation come out of his mouth. True or false?
Same here.
Big problem. Deregulation got us into this mess.
And Larry Summers is running his own hedge fund, so I'm not sure he's going to want to bring hedge funds under any kind of scrutiny. It'll be interesting to see what other advice Obama turns to, but in making these two appointments, Summers and Geithner, it suggests that reform could be stymied within the Obama administration by people he's appointing, and that's what I worry about.
Right.
I don't say this as somebody who's likes to or wants to criticize Obama. I was very supportive of him throughout the primaries, and I was glad to see him elected, just to be upfront.
That's right. And Clinton appointed Geithner as to the president of the New York Fed, did he not?
I'm sorry. Could you?
Was it Clinton who appointed Geithner to be president of the New York Fed?
Well, this opens up a real interesting conversation, because the president of the New York Fed is not actually appointed by the president of the United States, and the Senate has no confirmation powers, when it comes to the presidents of any of the regional Federal Reserve banks. There's this illusion that the Federal Reserve is accountable to the public, and in fact, the Federal Reserve banks are privately owned. They're owned by the same financial institutions they're supposed to regulate. This is a blatantly unconstitutional delegation of lawmaking power to a private interest group. And there have been serious constitutional challenges in the federal courts. They've all been thrown out at the level of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, just one rung below the Supreme Court of the United States. And what's significant is that the courts have not ruled on the merits. It seems clear that if they were to rule on the merits, two main arguments. One is the delegation principle, and the other is the appointments clause. If they were to rule on the merits, they'd be hard-pressed to deny the Federal Reserve is not a constitutional entity. But they have dismissed the cases on procedural grounds.
And in fact, the Federal Reserve concept was opposed by the framers of the Constitution. And in fact, our current Federal Reserve system is actually the third incarnation of of two previous Federal Reserve Bank
Well,
systems.
that's right. The first bank of the United States, which Jefferson and Hamilton argued about, and the second bank of the United States, in which Andrew Jackson vetoed it. And this bank would deserve to fail on constitutional principles, and the courts refused to rule on the merits. They just dismissed for procedural reasons. They say that plaintiffs lack standing, that the plaintiffs can't show that they've been injured by the Fed, and that if it's a member of Congress who's bringing the case, they dismiss under a novel theory called equitable discretion.
So have there been any class action lawsuits?
I don't think they had lawsuits that consisted of industries such as manufacturers who tried to claim that they were injured by the interest rate decisions of the Federal Open Market Committee. And the court had ruled each time that they couldn't show that they were directly injured by the Fed, and that's because the Fed doesn't lend directly to Main Street. The Fed lends through the banking system, and none of the big banks are going to challenge the Fed system since they own the Fed.
Well, I'm glad we're at this juncture in the conversation, because you're the legal I want to ask this question to. I have regarded many aspects of these bailout packages, starting with TARP and then going down the line to the other 13 credit facilities, as not just the unprecedented use of power and authority by the Treasury, U.S. Treasury, and the Federal Reserve Bank, but also the unconstitutional exercise of power and authority. Since the bailouts, have you seen maybe any cracks in the legal arguments here where such a case could be filed?
I think you will see a challenge brought in federal courts in which the plaintiffs are members of Congress. I think that's in the works. It's not been widely reported, but I can tell you I believe it is afoot and it will happen.
Talk to me 30 more seconds about that. I'm intrigued.
Well, I think the basis of the challenge will be a delegation claim. And when Congress delegates lawmaking power, rulemaking power to a federal agency, let's say like the Environmental Protection Agency, it has to have clear guidelines so that the agency has limited authority, limited discretion, and a lot of, or some degree of policy guidance. And the courts say that there must be an intelligible principle attached to the delegation.
Unless you're the president.
Well, yeah, well, the president does have some extra powers, you could say, at times. But this delegation we're talking about, where Congress has delegated to the Treasury Department the authority to spend up to $700 billion, there is so little policy guidance in there. It is pretty much, here's $700 billion. You can use it to purchase just about any asset at any price in any amount, hold it for as long as you like, and sell it at any price in any amount to anyone you want. Well, where's the public interest? Where's the policy direction? There's a good chance that that kind of a delegation could get struck down, but it would take a very activist court. When I say there's a good chance, I should amend that. There's not a good chance.
All right.
It's a good argument, and it deserves to win. But it's hard.
Congress comes to you, and they ask you to make that case. They hear about your reputation here at Chapman, and they say, Tim, argue the case. Who exactly are you representing? All of Congress?
No. It would be the members of Congress who decided to become named plaintiffs.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got one for you. How about the Republican senator out of Alabama, Shelby?
Shelby, he's an interesting one. I'll say he's somewhat consistent because I remember him as being an almost immediate critic of the $700 billion bailout plan, and now he's a critic of the bailout for General Motors and Ford and Chrysler.
Yeah.
Although on that issue, the automobile industry, I think he does represent a state that has a lot of foreign-owned auto plants within the state. So he might have a certain self-interest in opposing a bailout or a bridge loan for the automakers.
All right, so you're going to bring the challenge forward. Where are the damages? What's your argument?
Well, the argument is the nature of the delegation, that it's delegating too much authority to the Treasury Department. But you see, the Treasury Department is actually within the cabinet itself. So I must say I'm not sure. My studies, my research of the delegation doctrine is much more narrow. It's really confined